Look around you right now. You are likely sitting in a comfortable room, safe from the elements, completely secure in your position at the very top of the food chain. If you hear a branch snap outside in the dark, you might not even look up. You might just assume it is the wind, or perhaps a small, harmless animal scurrying through the brush. We have conquered the night. We have paved over the wild, illuminated the darkness, and placed ourselves so firmly at the apex of this world that the very concept of being hunted feels like a dark fairy tale. But this absolute security is an illusion. It is a very recent, very fragile anomaly in the grand, sweeping story of human existence. For almost the entirety of our history on this planet, we were not the masters of the earth. We were the prey. We need to rewind the clock. We are going back to the Pleistocene epoch, a vast era spanning from 2.6 million to 12,000 years ago. This was a time when the world was untamed, untamable, and ruthlessly violent. Strip away your clothes, your concrete walls, your artificial light, and your steel blades. Imagine yourself standing on the prehistoric African savanna or in the dense, suffocating brush of primeval forests. You are small. Early hominids were barely 5 feet tall. You are entirely naked. You have no thick hide to protect your vital organs. You do not have venom. You do not have razor-sharp claws. You cannot run fast enough to outpace a predator, and you are not strong enough to wrestle one. Your teeth are flat and blunt, designed for chewing roots and leaves, entirely useless for defense. Physically, you are one of the most defenseless creatures in a landscape, absolutely overflowing with biological killing machines. In this world, fear was not just an emotion. It was the fundamental state of existence. It was the air our ancestors breathed. From the moment the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bloody hues of orange and red, a deeply ingrained panic would set in. The shadows would stretch, and the domain of the hominid would end. The night belonged to the monsters, and these monsters were not mythological. They were flesh, blood, bone, and massive slashing teeth. Consider the saber-toothed cats. Smilodon and Megantereon were apex predators of unimaginable power. They were built like heavily muscled tanks, far more robust than any modern lion or tiger. They possessed muscular forelimbs designed to grapple and pin down massive prey, bringing them in close so their enormous, serrated canine teeth could deliver a precise, fatal tearing bite to the throat or belly. For a creature built to take down ground sloths and baby mammoths, a frail, slow-moving hominid was nothing more than an effortless, bite-sized snack. When the grass moved, it was not the wind. It was death, stalking on padded paws. But staying out of the tall grass didn't save you. Many people assume our ancestors survived by simply climbing trees, swinging away into the canopy where the ground-dwelling predators could not reach them. But the trees were already occupied. Enter Dinofelis, a creature sometimes called the false saber-toothed cat. Dinofelis was built perfectly for climbing. Its skeleton reveals a predator that was heavily muscled, stealthy, and comfortable in the branches. Fossil evidence has shown Dinofelis remains in the same caves as early hominid skulls, skulls that bear the unmistakable, crushing puncture marks of canine teeth, spaced exactly to match the jaws of this terrifying feline. Paleontologists believe Dinofelis was a specialist. It didn't just hunt us opportunistically, it specialized in hunting primates. Imagine the sheer terror of huddling on a thick branch in the pitch black of night, clutching your children, only to hear the subtle scrape of heavy claws on bark moving slowly up the trunk beneath you. Nowhere was safe. The ground was death, and the trees were a trap. If you managed to survive the night and the dawn broke, the terror did not lift. It merely changed form. You still needed to drink. Water is life, but in the Pleistocene, the watering hole was an arena of slaughter. To get a drink, you had to leave the relative cover of the brush and expose yourself on the open banks. Beneath the muddy, seemingly calm surface of the water lurked prehistoric crocodiles, like Crocodylus anthropophagus. The very name translates to the crocodile that eats humans. These reptiles were significantly larger than modern Nile crocodiles. They would explode from the water with terrifying speed, jaws snapping shut with enough kinetic energy to shatter bones instantly. Fossilized hominid bones have been found with massive crocodile bite marks, proving that leaning down to scoop a handful of water was a gamble with your life. You had to watch the ripples, scan the reeds, and drink in a state of hypervigilance, knowing that at any second, the water could erupt. And if you were carefully watching the trees, the tall grass and the water, you were forgetting to look up. The skies held their own nightmares. Giant birds of prey, far larger than any eagle alive today, patrolled the thermal currents above. Look at the famous Taung child, a fossilized skull of an early hominid toddler discovered in South Africa. For decades, scientists wondered what killed this young primate. The skull was damaged, but not by a cat or a hyena. The puncture marks were at the base of the eye sockets, and the bone was cracked in a highly specific manner. It perfectly matches the damage caused by the talons and beak of a massive bird of prey, similar to the modern African crowned eagle, but on a grander scale. These giant raptors would swoop down silently from the blinding sun, burying meat-hooked talons into the skulls of our children and carrying them off into the sky while the parents watched, screaming, entirely powerless to stop it. Even scavenging, our earliest source of meat, was a suicidal endeavor. If our ancestors spotted vultures circling and went to claim the scraps of a dead animal, they had to compete with giant, pack-hunting hyenas. The giant hyena, Pachycrocuta, was the size of a modern lioness. They had jaws capable of shattering elephant bones to get to the marrow inside. If a troop of hominids tried to chase them away from a carcass, they weren't just risking a bite. They were risking being torn limb from limb by a pack of laughing, relentless bone crushers. And then there were the giant bears, like Agriotherium, towering monstrosities that could run down anything on the plains. We were literally surrounded on a three-dimensional battlefield. Death came from below the water, above in the clouds, hiding in the branches, and charging through the grass. Living under this unrelenting pressure changed us. It wired our brains for anxiety. That feeling you get today when you are walking alone in the dark and the hair on the back of your neck stands up. That inexplicable dread that makes your heart race when you hear a bump in the night. That is not irrational. That is an ancient genetic memory. That is the ghost of the Pleistocene whispering in your DNA. It is the survival mechanism that kept your great ancestors from being eaten by a Dinofelis. We are the descendants of the nervous, the paranoid, and the terrified. The brave hominids, the ones who didn't look over their shoulders, the ones who walked boldly into the tall grass. They did not become our ancestors. They became dinner. For millions of years, this was the absolute reality of human existence. We were scavengers, foragers, and permanent victims. We were on the menu for virtually every large carnivore on the planet. But obviously, the story does not end there. Because you are sitting here today, listening to this, and the saber-toothed cats are nothing but dusty bones in museum glass cases. So, what changed? How did the weakest, most pathetic creature on the brutal prehistoric savanna claw its way from the very bottom of the food chain to the undisputed top? It wasn't claws, and it wasn't venom. It was the mind. The turning point in the history of our world was not a biological mutation. It was a technological and cognitive revolution. It started with a spark. The taming of fire was the first time in the history of the earth that a living creature harnessed a force of nature. Imagine the first time an early human stood their ground against the darkness, holding a burning branch. For millions of years, the predators had ruled the night. Fire changed the rules. It was a weapon made of light and heat. It blinded the nocturnal eyes of the cats. It burned the sensitive noses of the hyenas. For the first time, hominids could carve out a tiny, flickering bubble of safety in the absolute black. The night no longer belonged entirely to the monsters. Fire extended our days, allowed us to cook our food, giving us massive caloric boosts that literally fueled the rapid expansion of our brains. And most importantly, it offered psychological armor. But fire was only a shield. To step out of the role of prey, we needed a sword. We began to strike stones together. We shattered rocks to create sharp edges. A simple flake of flint might not look like much, but it was a synthetic fang. We didn't have claws, so we made them. We took long, straight branches and sharpened the ends. We hardened the wood in our protective fires. We created the spear. Suddenly, the soft, fleshy hominid had a reach. A saber-toothed cat trying to pounce would meet a wall of sharp wooden spikes. Yet, even with fire and spears, a single human is no match for a giant predator. The final piece of the puzzle, our greatest weapon of all, was each other. The very fear that plagued us forced us to band together. We evolved complex social structures. We developed advanced communication, pointing, gesturing, and eventually language. We realized that while one human is a snack, 50 humans acting as a single, coordinated organism is a force of nature.